The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty fairgrounds of Sweetwater, Texas, casting long shadows between the rickety wooden booths and livestock pens. The air hung thick with the smell of barbecue smoke, hay, and sweat as the annual county fair reached its peak. Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered hands gripping a lukewarm beer, watching the spectacle unfold before him with tired, cynical eyes. At 42, Jake had seen enough of life to know that most people were predictable, selfish, and disappointing. His ranch, the Double M, sat 15 miles outside town on 3,000 acres of scrubland that he'd inherited from his father. For the past 8 years since his divorce from Sarah, he'd lived alone except for his cattle, his horse Thunder, and his aging border collie Rex. He preferred it that way. Animals were honest. They didn't lie, cheat, or abandon you when things got tough. The auctioneer's voice crackled through the ancient PA system, drawing Jake's attention to the makeshift stage where the annual charity auction was taking place. It was a tradition that had always left a bitter taste in his mouth, wealthy townsfolk bidding on dates, with local young women, supposedly to raise money for the volunteer fire department. In reality, it was little more than sanctioned humiliation dressed up as community spirit. Next up, we have Miss Elena Vasquez, the auctioneer bellowed, his face red from the heat and excitement. Now folks, I gotta warn you, this little firecracker comes with a disclaimer. According to her foster family, she's too wild to tame. But hey, maybe that's exactly what some of you fellas are looking for. The crowd erupted in crude laughter and wolf whistles. Jake felt his jaw tighten as he watched a young woman, barely 20 by his estimate, being led onto the stage. She walked with her head held high, dark hair flowing past her shoulders, defiance radiating from every step. Her foster father, Harold Becker, a bloated man in an ill-fitting suit, gripped her arm possessively as he whispered something in her ear that made her flinch. Elena's eyes swept across the crowd and for a brief moment they locked with Jake's. In that instant he saw something that hit him like a punch to the gut, not wildness as they claimed, but raw, desperate fear masked by stubborn pride. She was trapped and everyone here was treating it like entertainment. "What am I bid for a dinner date with our wild child here?" the auctioneer continued, oblivious to the girl's obvious distress. "She's got spirit, gentlemen. Might take a strong man to handle her." The bidding started at $50. Jake watched in disgust as several of the town's most notorious troublemakers joined in. Tommy Burke, who'd been arrested twice for domestic violence. Rick Santana, who owned the seediest bar in 3 counties. And worst of all, Harold's business partner, Frank Meadows, a man whose reputation with young women was whispered about but never officially challenged. As the bids climbed higher, Jake noticed Elena's composure beginning to crack. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, and he could see her chest rising and falling rapidly. Harold leaned over and said something else to her, and she actually took a step back from him, only to be pulled forward again. "Going once for $300 to Mr. Meadows?" the auctioneer called out. Something snapped inside Jake. Before he could think it through, his hand shot up. 500. The crowd fell silent, turning to stare at him. Jake Morrison was known as a hermit, a man who came to town only when absolutely necessary and had never shown interest in any woman since his divorce. His intervention was as shocking as it was unexpected. Harold Becker's face darkened. "Now Jake, you don't want to get involved in." "750, Jake called out, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet fairgrounds. Frank Meadows glared at him. 800. 1,000, Jake replied without hesitation, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. Something had shifted in her expression. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with confusion and a glimmer of hope. The auctioneer looked around the crowd, but no one else seemed willing to bid against the reclusive rancher. Going once, going twice, sold to Jake Morrison for $1,000. As the crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves about Jake's unexpected behavior, he made his way toward the stage. Harold intercepted him, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Morrison?" Harold demanded. "Elena's my responsibility and I don't appreciate." "You got your money," Jake interrupted, pulling out his wallet and counting out 10 $100 bills. "Our business is done." Harold snatched the money but didn't move away. "She's trouble, Jake. More trouble than you can handle. I've been trying to straighten her out for 2 years, but she's got a mouth on her and a stubborn streak a mile wide. She's been kicked out of 3 jobs and 2 schools. The girl's poison." Jake looked past Harold to where Elena stood on the stage, clearly listening to every word. Her face had gone pale, but her chin remained raised defiantly. Maybe she just needs someone who isn't trying to break her spirit, he said quietly. He walked past Harold and extended his hand to Elena to help her down from the stage. She stared at it for a long moment before accepting his assistance, her fingers cold despite the Texas heat. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a slight Mexican accent that Harold and his family had clearly been trying to suppress. I don't know why you did that, but thank you." Jake studied her face up close. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty marked by stress and exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and he could see the tension in her shoulders, as if she was perpetually braced for the next blow. "What's your real story?" he asked as they walked away from the fairgrounds toward his pickup truck. "Because I'm betting it's nothing like what Harold's been telling people." Elena was quiet for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, as they reached his dust-covered Ford F-150, she spoke. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 17. Harold and Martha were supposed to be temporary guardians until I turned 18, but they found ways to keep me dependent on them. They take my paychecks, they control where I go, who I see. Today was supposed to be my punishment for acting out, which really means I told Harold I was tired of him coming into my room at night." Jake stopped walking, his hand freezing on the truck's door handle. "What did you just say?" "Nothing," Elena said quickly, fear flashing in her eyes. "I didn't say anything. Please can you take me home? I'll work out some way to pay you back for the money you spent." "Get in the truck," Jake said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "But we're not going to Harold's house." Elena hesitated. "Where are we going?" "My ranch. And before you start worrying, I've got a guest room, a lock on the door, and no interest in taking advantage of someone half my age. But I'll be damned if I'm sending you back to that situation." As they drove through the darkening Texas landscape, Elena stared out the window at the endless expanse of prairie grass and scattered cattle. For the first time in 3 years she felt like she could breathe. She didn't know what this stranger's motives were, but anything had to be better than going back to Harold's house. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why did you help me?" Jake was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel as they turned onto the dirt road leading to his property. "Because somebody should have helped me when I was your age and trapped in a bad situation. And because you're not wild, you're just scared and fighting for your life." As the lights of the Double M Ranch came into view, Elena felt tears she'd been holding back for months finally begin to fall. The first thing Elena noticed about Jake's ranch house was how quiet it was. Not the oppressive silence of Harold's house, where everyone walked on eggshells and spoke in whispers, but a peaceful quiet that seemed to wrap around her like a warm blanket. The house itself was modest but well-maintained, a single-story structure with a wraparound porch and large windows that looked out over rolling pastures dotted with cattle. Jake led her inside, flipping on lights as they went. The interior was sparse but comfortable, with worn leather furniture, Native American rugs and walls lined with bookshelves. Everything was clean and organized, but it felt lived in rather than sterile. "Guest rooms down the hall," Jake said, setting his keys on a wooden table by the door. "Bathrooms right across from it. Are you hungry?" Elena realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast, Harold's punishment for her disrespectful behavior the night before. Yes actually." "Sit," Jake ordered, gesturing toward the kitchen table. "I'll make us something." As Jake moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, Elena found herself studying him more carefully. He was tall and lean, with graying brown hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting against the sun. His hands were scarred and calloused from hard work, and he moved with the quiet confidence of a man comfortable in his own space. "So," she said tentatively, "you really live out here all alone?" "Most of the time," Jake replied, cracking eggs into a pan. "I've got ranch hands who come by during the day, but they head home to their families at night. It's just me and the animals." "Doesn't it get lonely?" Jake was quiet for a moment, stirring scrambled eggs with more attention than they probably required. "Lonely's better than being around people who make you miserable." Elena understood that sentiment all too well. "How long have you been divorced?" 8 years. Jake glanced at her. "How'd you know I was divorced?" "You've got tan lines where a wedding ring used to be, and there are spaces on the walls where pictures used to hang. Plus, the whole house feels like a man trying to erase the memory of someone." Jake served her a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast, then sat down across from her with his own meal. "You're observant. You have to be when you're living with people who might hurt you," Elena said quietly. "You learn to read moods, to watch for warning signs." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Jake spoke again. "Tell me about your parents." Elena's face softened. "They were wonderful. My dad was a mechanic, he could fix anything with an engine. My mom was a teacher. They came here from Mexico when they were teenagers, worked their asses off to build a good life. They always said America was the land of opportunity, but you had to fight for your opportunities. What happened to them? Drunk driver ran a red light, Elena said, her voice matter-of-fact despite the pain in her eyes. They were coming home from my high school graduation dinner. I was supposed to be in the car with them, but I'd gone to a party instead. Spent 2 years feeling guilty about that before I realized the guilt wasn't helping anyone. Jake nodded. Survivor's guilt is a bitch. But your parents wouldn't want you to carry that. No, they wouldn't. Elena pushed food around her plate. They'd want me to fight for my opportunities like they did. But it's hard to fight when you're trapped. You're not trapped anymore, Jake said firmly. Tomorrow we'll figure out a plan. Elena looked up at him, searching his face for hidden motives. Why are you being so nice to me? What do you want in return? Nothing, Jake said simply. Maybe I just want to do something right for once. That night, Elena lay in the guest room bed, the first real bed she'd slept in for months, since Harold had moved her to a cot in the basement as another form of control, and stared at the ceiling. The room was small but comfortable, with clean sheets that smelled like lavender and a window that looked out over the moonlit pastures. For the first time in 3 years she felt safe. But safety was a luxury she'd learned not to trust. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of horses whinnying and men's voices outside her window. She dressed quickly in the same clothes from the day before, all she had, and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Jake drinking coffee and reading a newspaper. Morning, he said looking up. Coffee's fresh. My ranch hands are here, they start early during summer. Elena poured herself a cup and sat down. Jake, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Shoot. What happens when you get tired of having me here? When the novelty wears off and you decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth? Jake set down his newspaper and looked at her seriously. Elena, I'm not going to lie to you, I don't know what the long-term plan is. But I can promise you this, I won't throw you out without warning, and I won't send you back to a dangerous situation. We'll figure it out as we go. Before Elena could respond, there was a knock at the front door. Jake frowned. Unexpected visitors were rare at the Double M. When he opened the door, Harold Becker stood on the porch, flanked by 2 police officers. Morning, Jake, Harold said with a cold smile. I'm here for Elena. She's a minor in my custody, and you had no right to take her. Elena appeared beside Jake, her face pale but determined. I'm 20 years old, Harold. I'm not a minor, and I don't have to go anywhere with you. The hell you don't, Harold snapped. You're living in my house, eating my food. And working 2 jobs to pay you back for it, Elena interrupted. Plus cleaning your house and cooking your meals. I've more than earned my keep. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stepped forward. Ma'am, are you here of your own free will? Yes, Elena said firmly. Absolutely. Harold's face reddened. Officer Rodriguez, this man bought her at an auction like she was a piece of livestock. It's human trafficking. It was a charity date auction, Jake said calmly. Legal and above board. And Elena came with me voluntarily. Officer Rodriguez looked between them all, clearly trying to assess the situation. Mr. Becker, if Miss Vasquez is 20 years old and came here willingly, there's nothing we can do. She's an adult. She's mentally unstable. Harold protested. She needs supervision. I need to get away from men who think they own me, Elena said, her voice shaking with anger. Harold, you've controlled every aspect of my life for 3 years. You've stolen my money, isolated me from friends, and... She stopped herself before revealing the worst of it, knowing it would be her word against his. Officer Rodriguez studied Elena's face. Miss, are you in any immediate danger if you stay here? Elena looked at Jake, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. No, officer. I feel safer here than I have in years. After the police left with a frustrated Harold, Jake and Elena stood on the porch watching the dust settle from their departure. That won't be the end of it, Elena said quietly. Harold doesn't give up easily, especially when it comes to something he thinks belongs to him. Then we'd better make sure you're prepared for whatever comes next, Jake replied. Starting with getting you some clothes that actually fit and a phone so you can start looking for work. Elena turned to stare at him. You do that? Help me get back on my feet. Elena, I don't know what kind of men you've been around, but helping someone isn't supposed to come with strings attached. Sometimes people help because it's the right thing to do. For the second time in 2 days, Elena felt tears threaten to fall. But this time they weren't tears of fear or desperation. They were tears of relief and maybe, just maybe, hope. 2 weeks into Elena's stay at the Double M, Jake was beginning to understand what Harold had meant about her being difficult, though not in the way Harold had intended. Elena was stubborn, prideful, and had a fierce independence that made her bristle at any suggestion that she was accepting charity. She'd found a job at Rosie's diner in town within 3 days and insisted on paying Jake rent, despite his protests. "I don't take handouts," she'd said firmly, counting out crumpled bills on his kitchen table. "My parents taught me to earn my way." Jake had learned not to argue with her about it. Instead, he'd quietly started setting the money aside in an envelope, planning to give it back to her when she was ready to move out and needed it for a security deposit. This morning, like every morning for the past week, Elena was up before dawn, helping Jake with the morning chores before her shift at the diner. She'd taken to ranch work with surprising skill, showing no fear of the cattle and handling his temperamental horses with a gentle confidence that impressed even his ranch hands. "She's got good instincts with animals," his foreman Miguel Santos had observed the day before. "They trust her." Jake had noticed the same thing. Elena seemed to have a natural understanding of animal behavior, approaching even the most skittish horses with patience and respect. It was ironic, considering how wary she remained of most humans. "Hand me that bucket," Elena called out from Thunder's stall, where she was brushing down Jake's prized quarter horse. The stallion, who was notorious for being one-man horse, stood calmly under her ministrations. Jake passed her the feed bucket, noting how Thunder nickered softly when Elena spoke to him in Spanish. "He likes you better than he likes me these days." "Animals don't lie," Elena said, echoing something Jake had thought many times. "They don't pretend to be something they're not. If they trust you, it means something." As they worked together in comfortable silence, Jake found himself watching Elena more than he probably should. Over the past 2 weeks, the haunted look in her eyes had begun to fade, replaced by something brighter. She was putting on weight, the sharp angles of her face softening, and she smiled more readily, though she still startled when people approached her unexpectedly. "Jake," Elena said suddenly, her voice hesitant. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot. What happened with your wife? Your ex-wife, I mean." Jake continued mucking out the stall he was working on, taking his time to answer. "Sarah wanted a different life than the one I could give her. She wanted to move to Dallas, wanted me to sell the ranch and get a job in the city. When I wouldn't do it, she found someone who could give her what she wanted. Do you regret not going with her?" Jake paused, leaning on his pitchfork. It was a question he'd asked himself countless times over the years. "I regret that I couldn't make her happy. But no, I don't regret staying. This land, it's part of who I am. My grandfather bought this place with nothing but hope and determination. My father expanded it, made it profitable. I couldn't just walk away from that legacy." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "My parents would have understood that. They knew what it meant to build something, to have roots." Before Jake could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. They both looked up to see a familiar black SUV pulling into the yard, Harold's car. "Shit," Elena muttered, her entire body tensing. "It's okay," Jake said firmly. "You don't have to talk to him if you don't want to." But as Harold got out of the car, it became clear he wasn't alone. A woman in a severe gray suit followed him, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Elena," Harold called out, his voice falsely cheerful. "Come over here, sweetheart. There's someone I want you to meet." Elena remained where she was and Jake stepped protectively closer to her. "Harold, what can I do for you?" "This is Miss Patricia Winters from Adult Protective Services," Harold announced. "I've been concerned about Elena's mental state, and I felt it was my duty as someone who cares about her to request a welfare check." Ms. Winters approached them with brisk efficiency. "Miss Vasquez? I'm here to conduct an assessment of your current living situation and mental well-being. There have been concerns raised about your ability to make sound decisions." Elena's face went white, then flushed with anger. "Concerns raised by whom?" "The man who's been controlling and exploiting me for 3 years." "Now, Elena," Harold said in a patronizing tone, "there's no need to get upset. We're all just looking out for your best interests." "My best interests?" Elena's voice rose. "Harold, you made me sleep in your basement, you took every paycheck I earned and you—" She stopped herself again, glancing at Jake. Ms. Winters pulled out a notebook. "Miss Vasquez, I need to ask you some questions. Are you currently taking any medications for mental health issues?" "No." "Have you ever been diagnosed with any psychiatric conditions?" "No." Mr. Becker has indicated that you have a history of erratic behavior, job instability, and difficulty maintaining relationships. Can you address these concerns? Jake stepped forward. Ma'am, with all due respect, maybe you should be asking why Elena had job instability while living with Harold, instead of assuming it was her fault. Ms. Winters looked at him coolly. And you are? Jake Morrison. This is my property and Elena is my guest. I see. And what is the nature of your relationship with Miss Vasquez? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Jake met Elena's eyes, seeing the fear there. He knew that the wrong answer could give Harold the ammunition he needed to have Elena declared incompetent or unsafe. Elena is a friend who needed help, Jake said carefully. She's been staying in my guest room while she gets back on her feet. She has a job in town, she pays her own way and she's free to leave any time she wants. Ms. Winters scribbled notes. Miss Vasquez, do you feel that you're being coerced or manipulated into staying here? The only person who's ever coerced or manipulated me is standing right there, Elena said, pointing at Harold. Jake has never asked me for anything, never tried to control me, never made me feel unsafe. The same can't be said for my so-called guardian. Harold's face darkened. Elena, you're being dramatic. I provided you with a home, food, clothing. In exchange for unpaid labor and complete submission, Elena shot back. That's not guardianship, Harold. That's indentured servitude. Ms. Winters continued asking questions for another 20 minutes, probing Elena's mental state, her living conditions, and her plans for the future. Through it all, Jake watched Elena handle herself with dignity and intelligence, answering every question directly and honestly. Finally, Ms. Winters closed her notebook. Miss Vasquez, based on my assessment, you appear to be competent and capable of making your own decisions. However, I would recommend that you consider seeking counseling to help process any trauma from your past experiences. Elena nodded. I'll consider it. After Harold and Ms. Winters left, Elena collapsed onto the porch steps, her hands shaking with residual adrenaline. You did good, Jake said, sitting down beside her. You handled that perfectly. This isn't over, Elena said quietly. Harold won't give up. He's lost too much control, too much money. He'll find another way to come at me. Jake was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that surprised even him. Elena, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no without any consequences. She looked at him warily. What? How would you feel about staying here permanently? Not as a guest but as a partner in the ranch. You're good with the animals, you understand the work and… He paused, searching for the right words. And I think we work well together. Elena stared at him in shock. Jake, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Think about it. Harold can't touch you if you're a legitimate business partner with a stake in the property. And I could use the help. The ranch has been struggling since it's just been me running it. What would people say? A 20-year-old girl and a 42-year-old man living together? Jake shrugged. Let them talk. I've never cared much what people thought anyway. Elena was quiet for a long time, staring out at the cattle grazing in the afternoon sun. Finally she turned to him. Can I ask you something honestly? Always. Are you offering this because you pity me, or because you actually think I could be a real partner? Jake met her gaze steadily. Elena, pity doesn't make someone get up at 5 a.m. to help with chores. Pity doesn't make someone handle a 1,000-pound stallion like they were born to it. You've got more grit and determination than most people I've known, and you're not afraid of hard work. This ranch needs someone like you. For the first time since he'd known her, Elena's smile was completely unguarded. Then yes, she said. I'd like to try. As the sun set over the Double M Ranch, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope for the future. 3 months had passed since Elena became Jake's official partner in the Double M Ranch, and the transformation had been remarkable. Under their joint management, the ranch was thriving in ways it hadn't for years. Elena had implemented new systems for tracking cattle health and breeding records, while her natural ability with horses had allowed them to expand into horse training services for neighboring ranches. But success bred its own problems, especially when it came to Harold Becker. He's been spreading rumors around town, Elena told Jake one evening as they sat on the porch after a long day of work. Rosie at the diner told me people are saying we're sleeping together, that you're taking advantage of me. Jake's jaw tightened. What do you want to do about it? Ignore it, Elena said firmly. People who know us know the truth. The rest don't matter. But ignoring the rumors became harder when they started affecting business. 2 potential clients had canceled training contracts, and Jake overheard enough whispered conversations at the feed store to know the gossip was getting worse. The breaking point came on a humid Saturday morning in late August. Elena was in town picking up supplies when she encountered Frank Meadows, the man who had nearly won her at the auction, outside the hardware store. Well, Frank said, blocking her path with a leering smile. If it isn't Jake Morrison's little pet project. Tell me, sweetheart, was he worth $1,000? Elena tried to step around him, but Frank moved to block her again. I'm talking to you, girl. Seems to me like you went from one man's property to another's. At least with Harold you were just playing house. Now you're playing wife to a man old enough to be your daddy. Get out of my way, Frank, Elena said quietly, but her voice carried a warning. Or what? You'll tell your sugar daddy on me? Frank laughed. Face it, honey, you're nothing but a whore with delusions of respectability. Everyone in town knows what you really are. Elena's control snapped. Her fist connected with Frank's nose with a satisfying crunch, sending him stumbling backward into the hardware store's window display. What I am, Elena said, stepping over Frank as he groaned on the ground, is someone who won't be disrespected by a pig like you. And if you ever speak to me like that again, the broken nose will be the least of your problems. By the time Elena got back to the ranch, news of the incident had already reached Jake. He was waiting for her in the barn, his expression unreadable. Heard you had some excitement in town, he said. Elena set down the bag of supplies, her adrenaline still running high. Frank Meadows had it coming. I won't apologize for defending myself. I'm not asking you to apologize, Jake said. I'm asking if you're okay. The concern in his voice made Elena's anger deflate slightly. I'm fine. But Jake, this is only going to make things worse. People are already talking and now they'll say I'm violent, unstable. Elena. Jake's voice was firm. Look at me. She met his eyes, seeing something there that made her breath catch. I don't care what people say about us, Jake continued. I don't care about the rumors, the gossip, or the canceled contracts. What I care about is that you feel safe and respected. If that means we have to fight the whole damn town, then that's what we'll do. Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. Jake, I can't ask you to sacrifice your reputation, your business relationships. You're not asking. I'm choosing. You're my partner, Elena. That means something. Before Elena could respond, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching made them both turn toward the main road. 3 trucks were pulling into the ranch yard, and Elena's heart sank when she recognized Harold's SUV leading the convoy. Harold got out, followed by Frank Meadows, sporting a bandaged nose and 2 black eyes, and several other men Elena recognized as Harold's business associates and drinking buddies. Jake. Harold called out as he approached the barn. We need to talk. Jake stepped slightly in front of Elena, his posture protective but non-threatening. Harold, what can I do for you? You can control your woman for starters, Frank snarled, pointing at Elena. That little bitch broke my nose. After you called her a whore, Jake replied calmly. Seems like a reasonable response to me. Harold held up his hands as if to play peacekeeper. Jake, this situation has gotten out of hand. Elena's clearly not stable enough to be living unsupervised. Maybe it's time to consider having her committed for evaluation. Elena stepped forward, her fear transforming into rage. You son of a bitch. You just can't stand that I got away from you, can you? Elena, Harold said in that same patronizing tone he'd used for years, you're proving my point right now. Look how agitated you're getting. This isn't normal behavior for a young woman. What's not normal, Elena shot back, is a 50-year-old man trying to control a woman who wants nothing to do with him. What's not normal is the fact that you can't accept that I'd rather work 16-hour days on a ranch than spend another minute under your roof. One of Harold's companions, a thin man with mean eyes, stepped forward. Nobody asked for your opinion, girl. Adults are talking. That was apparently the last straw for Jake. In one fluid motion, he moved between Elena and the men, his demeanor shifting from calm to dangerous. Gentlemen, I think it's time for you to leave my property. We're not going anywhere until this situation is resolved, Harold declared. Elena belongs with family, not playing ranch hand with some lonely old cowboy. Elena belongs wherever she chooses to be, Jake replied. And right now she chooses to be here. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the sheriff. Frank Meadows stepped forward, his face twisted with anger and pain. You think you're some kind of hero, Morrison? You think rescuing some Mexican whore makes you a white knight? Jake's fist connected with Frank's jaw before the man could say another word. Frank went down hard, and suddenly the tense standoff erupted into chaos. Harold's men rushed forward, and Jake found himself facing 4-to-1 odds. Elena didn't hesitate. She grabbed a pitchfork from the barn wall and waded into the fight, using the handle to trip one of Harold's men and sending him sprawling. "Miguel," she shouted toward the bunkhouse. "Carlos, help." Jake's ranch hands came running, evening the odds considerably. The fight was brief but vicious, ending only when the sound of sirens announced the arrival of the sheriff's department. Sheriff Tom Bradley, a weathered man in his 60s who'd known Jake's family for decades, surveyed the scene with weary eyes. "Somebody want to tell me what the hell happened here?" Harold immediately launched into his version of events, painting Elena and Jake as unstable and dangerous. But Sheriff Bradley had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize bullshit when he heard it. "Harold," the sheriff said when Harold finished his tale, "this is the third time in 2 months you've tried to cause trouble for Miss Vasquez. I'm starting to think you're the one with the problem." "Tom, you know me," Harold protested. "I'm just concerned about Elena's welfare." "What I know," Sheriff Bradley interrupted, "is that you've got a reputation for not taking no for an answer, especially when it comes to young women. And what I see here is a woman who's clearly capable of making her own decisions and a man who's supporting her right to make them." He turned to Jake and Elena. "Either of you want to press charges for trespassing and assault?" Elena looked at Jake, who nodded slightly. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want to press charges against Frank Meadows for harassment and assault, and against Harold Becker for trespassing and making threats." As the sheriff took statements and arrested Frank and Harold, Elena found herself shaking with a mixture of adrenaline, relief, and something else she couldn't quite identify. "It's over," Jake said quietly.